everybody, and welcome to this edition of The Public Square. I'm Wayne Shepherd here. Our studio population stays the same. Melanie's not here, but Sherry Eisen has stepped in, so we have maintained a consistent population here at The Public Square. We're going to talk about that today. Dave Zanotti is here, Alan C. Duncan, Rob Walgate, Sherry Eisen, as I mentioned, and Dr. Jeff Sanders with us as well. Team?
Wayne, this particular broadcast is being put together as a part of our TPS Express formula, which is a way in which we send out a brief radio program every week on some subject that has captured a lot of attention nationwide or worldwide. And the simplest way to get that broadcast free of charge delivered into your email box, not with a lot of other harassment, and it just we send it to you with a nice picture and our greeting once a week is simply to make sure that you're on our monthly update mailing list. And all that means is that we have your email address. Mm-hmm. It's great if you like things to come to you in the mail. We'll be happy to take your hard address as well, your snail mail address or U.S. postal address. But just an email address alone will get you this particular kind of programming every single week, delivered right into your email box. Now, you'll find that we don't do a tremendous amount of work here on the Public Square in circulating the product lines directly out to many of the social media agencies. A lot of people who do receive our broadcasts, however, that are comfortable doing social media do use those platforms. They use Twitter and they use all of them. And we're fine to take this message wherever the conversation goes. In that regard.
By the way, it's now X. You know that. It's not Twitter anymore. Let's not go there, huh? See, you didn't even know that.
Elon Musk can do just about anything he wants to do in this world, but change a name easily. All right. I mean, so what if he changed Tesla to X cars? Would everyone stop calling them Teslas?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay, anyhow, so the subject today is population, overpopulation, and population questions. And we've got a great story. Actually, today we're covering the gamut. We start in London, we'll go to China, we'll end up right here back in the United States. Sure, you've got an interesting story that came out in the Daily Mail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it appears that there's a couple that's in their mid-30s, and they've made a permanent choice to be childless. And that's something that seems to have been gaining momentum in America. And of course, in every other place in the world, they're talking about that. But their big concern is that they don't believe that earning $200,000 a year would make it possible for them to afford to have children. And they were looking at the long term, calculating out how they would live, what their comfort level would be in their lives, what their retirement would be. And one of the things that was interesting in reading that is that they said in their mid-30s that by the age of 40, they wanted their retirement income to be 5 times their annual earnings right now. In 5 years, that's a pretty aggressive goal. So you look at it and think they could very easily have children after that if they're set to that position. But I recognize they live in California, and that's a choice, and it's a very expensive place to live. But they were all factors in their decision, and they made it permanent.
So let's talk about that. Now, what I would like to do is the details of the story are fascinating, but I want to start with the younger part of the production room right now, because it's so easy for those of us that have been around a little longer to start quoting prices of what we paid for a cup of coffee back in 1970, okay? That's not fair. That's not fair to this couple. Alan, I'm going to throw this ball right to you.
I thought he was coming to me. What's the deal?
Sorry, St. Nick, you have to wait just a little longer. Alan, okay, Alan, right. Let's go to you. Your thoughts on what you just heard.
I feel bad for these folks. I wish I could sit down and have a conversation with them over an expensive cup of coffee, as you mentioned, because I find it very difficult. First of all, I empathize with them wanting to be, financially sound, and the fact that they said they're going to care for their elderly relatives. I'd ask them, well, who's going to care for you when you're elderly? Right. That's kind of how this thing works. But what I want to say is it's very tough for you as someone who has never had a child to convince me that you shouldn't have kids, because I know something that you don't know. I know that once you see your child's face, your life will never be the same again. So will it be expensive? Yes. But that's obviously you want to make sure that you can provide for your children, but you don't make this kind of decision purely based on finances. It's kind of like diving into the deep end off of a diving board. You just jump. And then once you meet those children, you know everything that you're going to have to go through will be worth it.
Wow.
Well said.
All right. Thank you very much for listening to The Public Square, and we're out.
That's all the time we have.
That's all the time we have today. You can't top that one. Sherry, go ahead. You wanted to say something, I think.
Well, in line of what Alan was talking about, the birth rate, it's been over 250,000 fewer births since 2012. And they are robbed. There is something about not having children in your life and the joy of their laughter. Yes, there is huge responsibility. But that decision of just automatically deciding that you don't want children, you're robbing yourself.
Well, what about this whole economic argument? Jeff, you look like you're trying to get in on this. Yeah.
Okay. I've actually had this conversation. It was about 15 years ago when I was a pastor. A young man came to the door of my house at night, pounding on the door, and I opened the door. I knew him, and I had married them off, a couple of years before, and he was crying. I said, "What's wrong? Is everybody okay?" Yeah, my wife wants us to have a baby. And I'm just looking at all the expense of it, and they're going to be so expensive. And I said, "Is that it? Is that the problem?" And I said, "Let me explain something." Okay, my wife and I, we have 4 kids. We lived on the edge of poverty for a long time. In fact, we probably would have qualified for food stamps. But because we are penny pinchers, and my wife is an expert with finances, you know what? All of our kids were clothed, and they all were educated, and we actually went on vacations, and everything was paid for. We had 1 car, not 2. For 12 years, we just had 1 vehicle, and we didn't miss out on anything. And I said, "Where is your faith? Do you believe that children are an inheritance of the Lord, and do you believe that God will provide for you?" He provided for us with 4 kids, and our kids are, they're kids, and they get into trouble, and they do things that frustrate us. But my life has never been the same since we had children, and I am so grateful, and we are so blessed. I would never want to go back. And I said, "You're missing out." I said, "You go home right now, and you go get your wife pregnant." I've never told anybody to do that before.
That was the homework assignment? That was the homework.
And he did, and they had a kid.
More letters, Ellen.
That's
was a true
Sanders, Sanders.
Send it to me.
Publicsquare.com.
Did they name the child Jeffrey?
No, there you go. So there's 2 principles, Jeff, that you've mentioned in that conversation. The first is that children are a gift from God.
Yes.
And I think it's fair to ask. We all know that's in the Bible, right? Do we believe that? All right, children are a gift from God. And then the second that is also hugely significant is, do we approach our lives believing that God is the provider? That God will provide for us. So if God gives us a gift, he also intends to provide for that gift, and that he's our provider. So I think those are fundamental principles that we have to wrestle with, because underneath this article, and we're not going to mention this couple's name because they're there and their pictures are in the paper. This isn't about them. This is about the conversation and about the question. So we talk about, do we truly believe as people of faith that God is our provider? God is our refuge. God is our strength. That God is our portion, our daily bread. Because if we believe that, it changes a lot. And I'll tell you, if all you do is watch television and look at ads on streaming video and listen to all the financial companies that are out there, they're going to tell you that if you don't have 5 times your salary put away by the time you're 40, the rains are coming, the storm's going to blow your house down, and you're going to have nothing. Here comes the big bad wolf. But isn't that exactly the opposite of what God says? Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you as well. So sometimes I think that what really is involved here is fear, and it's fear because we kind of don't know whose we are. and how much God does care and desire and has promised to provide for us.
Yes.
I guess that doesn't sell a lot of insurance policies, though, or investment portfolio buildup or whatever.
Dave, another thing I'd like to bring into the conversation is, what does it say about a person's heart when they say, I want to have all of these creature comforts for the rest of my life. Yeah. I want to have this. I want to have that. I need this. And children are just not a part of that.
Well, I think it's, again, this gets back to me. I think it's because you haven't met your kids yet. So you need to, need to use a little imagination and think, is having this stuff going to be better than meeting this human being and knowing them for their whole life?
And there's a lot of people who are afraid to be parents because they don't want to mess it up. They're afraid to mess up a life that would be placed into their care. So, I mean, look, was anybody around the table not scared about the idea of, guess what? We're going to have baby. I mean, what's the first? Man. And anyone who says the first thing that comes into your mind is absolute, total over rejoicing, I would say you're probably in the minority in that regard, because at least most of the people I've talked to, men and women, when they find that out, the first thought is like, oh boy. It's a very sober wonder. I mean, it stops you in your tracks, right?
It does. It does.
Yeah. Well, and not everyone can have children too. So I don't want anyone listening, if they're struggling.
Of course.
We're not condemning you in any type of way.
Well, that's most certainly true. We would never do that. Alan, let's come back to that and talk more about that.
Yeah, very important. Thank you for bringing that up, Alan. And we will continue this conversation today on The Public Square. We are online, as always, thepublicsquare.com.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
Introducing the latest program from The Public Square.
Kids on the Square.
We at Kids on the Square are dedicated to helping teach the next generation through topics like Bible stories, scientific marvels, and American history. We want to equip parents with fun and free educational resources to share the truth with their children. Won't you join us? New episodes are released monthly. You can listen wherever podcasts are available and visit kidsonthesquare.com to find out more. Thank you, and
welcome to Kids on the Square.
Every day, 535 people are charged with representing all of us in Washington, D.C. They preside over the largest budget in the world. They hold the Constitution in their hands. They can help protect our liberties or look the other way. 535 people. We put them in office. Isn't it time that we hold them in our prayers? A public service message from the American Policy Roundtable. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
And we're back with this edition of the Public Square, talking, at least we started initially talking about this decision made by some young couples not to have children. And Alan, you brought up such an important point. There are many couples who would love to have children but can't.
That brings us, Wayne, to another story that we've got to cover, which is in vitro fertilization in the Alabama case. We don't have time to get to that today, but we will be coming back to that conversation. But we want to be really sensitive about the fact that these are intimately personal decisions. Not everybody's facing the same situation. And the last thing we would do would be to condemn anyone, because those decisions are made between a married couple and God. So we're not minding other people's business, but we appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, since they're talking about it out loud in the newspapers, as to barriers for people to have children, because seldom do we think about the consequences of what's the part of life that you never had the opportunity to enjoy if you could have. So let's talk about that. And Rob, there's a second story that kind of relates to that in regards to consequences, coming to us out of China. And in spite of the fact that we try really hard not to do this, this is under the file of "We told you so." All right, because this story coming out in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, it comes out in regards to China. We know the policy that they had for how many years on a single child policy?
40 years.
40 years, and now they are experiencing a rapid population decline, and they don't meet population replacement levels. Now, many places around the world do not meet that threshold of 2.1 replacement level for individuals, but China is nowhere close, and some even question about the number that's being reported from the Chinese media, whether it's not an over-exaggeration to boot. So they may be well under replacement level.
Oh, well, they're so far under replacement level that by their own admission, within 70 years, they anticipate their population to be 1/3 the size that it is today. Can you imagine that?
And for 40 years, they cracked down, and it was a dictatorship in regards to how many children you could have.
They forced abortions for millions of women.
Yeah.
And where they weren't forcing abortions, people were voluntarily getting abortions because in Chinese culture, the male child was more desirable in that economic structure than a female child. And so if you're only going to be able to have one, then that just created more abortions. So this policy has turned out to be mathematically, scientifically, and practically in real life, real time, real space, an absolute disaster. But speaking of real time and real space, Alan, the Wall Street Journal had more to say about how this policy actually got started. And that caught your attention in regards to rocket science.
Yes. Well, we've been passing around this article from the Wall Street Journal written by Li Yan Chi, and it's a piece detailing, quote, how China miscalculated its way to a baby bust. So we talked about the fact that they did it. This is going to tell you how they did it. So in short, in the 60s and 70s, scientists were concerned about overpopulation, finite global resources, they say. And then one of these scientists, Song Jin, a Moscow-trained rocket scientist, after he studied in the Netherlands, started applying mathematical models to birth rates and then convinced the government to adopt that famous one-child policy. And so this article details all that and then talks about how devastating those effects have been over the past 40 years, how this was all a miscalculation.
So let me get this right. One of their legendary rocket scientists was given the task of creating mathematical scientific models based on population projections and to the state's specified goals. And the net result of that was the government said, okay, this has got to be right. So they took the policies, they implemented the policies, and about 50 years later, they're facing the extinction of their culture.
Yes. And the fascinating thing about this article is they said one factor missing from the population math was human behavior. So and
Really?
this led to us.
Hold on.
Yeah,
Nobody's going to
saw
believe
that
that
coming.
Nobody's going to believe that. That sounds like a setup from a Nate Bargatze comedy routine.
That's in the article.
Or Monty Python.
The only thing they forgot was human behavior. So they built the model and they forgot that little piece, okay, which translated into...
Sex is not rocket science. The title of our program.
Well, actually, no, there was a strong lobbying move made to make that the title of our program, which was considered greatly, then summarily rejected. But we did feel that it was only appropriate to give Alan the opportunity to say, that's a great punchline, because it is the punchline, isn't it? They forgot human behavior. And what they forgot was if you live in a tyranny and in a totalitarian regime, which for 50 years makes having more than one child criminal behavior with strong societal prosecution and persecution against people who get outside that boundary line, after about 50 years, people are afraid to have kids.
Yes.
They just don't want to anymore.
And we get back to the California couple who's talking about taking care of their elderly relatives that they need to take care of. And well, who's going to be left taking care of those that need taken care of down the road if you're not repopulating?
Yeah,
That's right.
What we've got is we have these things aren't happening in a vacuum. Now, I have got to tell you that the whole concept of modeling human behavior and predicting the outcomes is a
where have we
tricky
heard
business.
that before?
Yeah.
Sounds
Has a
familiar.
Strange ring about something else that started in China. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was a virus of some kind. Yeah, I think so. It took a couple of years, but if you leave people out of the equation, you leave human nature out of the equation, you end up with serious miscalculation is what comes down to. And that's what happened in China. Now, to a degree, this story is almost comic relief because it shows you that even in the largest nations of the world, the richest nations of the world, the most dominant nations in the world, people are people. And you can really mess this thing up. And not only have they messed it up, but they've messed it up at grave consequence. Well, you say, well, that's China. Well, let me tell you something. The United States right now is teetering at exactly the same situation.
Right. And Russia is as well.
Is that right, Wayne? Russia is as well.
Yeah. Its population has been in decline for some time now, even before losing how many hundreds of thousands in war deaths. The population has been going down, and hundreds of thousands of Russians leaving the country.
And you can see that also in many other advanced nations in Europe, but there are some nations that are instilling government policies, like Hungary, for example. They're giving tax breaks to women who have more than one child, 2 or 3 or 4 children. They're exempt from taxes for the rest of their life. They're doing everything they can to encourage more births in some of the Eastern European nations.
So isn't it ironic that we come to this place in the human experience, from China to London to right here where we live and right where everyone is listening to this program, wherever you may be, and a passage that seems to come resoundingly clear, leaping off the pages of Solomon's ancient writings in the book of Proverbs. There's a way that seems right unto a man, but the way therein is death. The whole idea that children are a gift from the Lord is clearly the antithesis of that, and clearly the wonder of being able to bear children for those who are able, and to raise children, and that involves all of us. It doesn't take a village, but it takes all of us doing our part. All right? This is the very lifeblood of human society. These are the basic fundamental building blocks. We're talking about family. And family is the core agency by which everything that's good happens. That's where it comes from in our society.
Just to back up what I said about Russia, I looked it up real quick. Russia has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, 1.42 children per woman in 2022. And that's down from 2.1 in the year 2000.
And Wayne, China is half that.
Wow.
One other thing that struck me from this article that we have here, one line says, this is now after people are realizing the math was wrong, which, oops, it took you 40 years to catch it. These models, you have to wait a generation to see how wrong you were, apparently. But it says, entrepreneurs, economists, and demographers have tried to convey the idea that China needs more babies. That's great, but it strikes me, it's just more scientists at the table, different fields. I know the entrepreneurs maybe not, but what about church leaders? China has great Christians there. What about the theologians, the philosophers, the artists? Like, we're acting like there's one field. Every other line in this article is, well, okay, what's the modern day scientist now think about it? Everything is looked at through the lens of science. Now, science is a great tool, but it's not the only field.
How much money was spent on that study to come to that conclusion as well? How many years of research?
Right. Well, there's a quick Chesterton quote that fits on this. He's talking about anthropologists. He writes in Heretics, he's talking about anthropologists studying humans. He says that they're making themselves inhuman in order to understand humanity. Mm-hmm. So there's something we miss when we forget, like, we're all people. You have to factor in human behavior and emotion into these kind of things.
So what's the takeaway of all this conversation, Dave?
Wayne, I was about to say, my clock's looking like we're about out of time.
Right.
So what I was going to do, I was going to give you an opportunity to say to the executive producer, excuse me, Alan, thank you, but we have to take a break. No, I think we should really close it on Chesterton's quote. I think we should give Alan the last word on this.
All right, let's hear it one more time then, Alan.
Speaking of anthropologists, he says he is making himself inhuman in order to understand humanity. And that's not good to do.
Wow. Great conversation today. Very important topic, timely topic. Thank you, team. You've been listening to The Public Square. Our daily edition is available, of course, on many radio stations and always online at thepublicsquare.com and with that free smartphone app called The Public Square.
Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.